So before, I'm going to introduce Katie, but before I do that part, it's been a long day and we've heard a lot, so we thought it might be helpful to have just to spend, we'll say just a minute since we're behind time, like a minute to stop and kind of think about how you've been feeling, any thoughts that have come to mind, and if you want, you can just think about them, or if you want to jot them down on a Post-it note, you can. And then also, if you have any questions, let's see, I was imagining this for a larger group, but questions that you might want to ask Katie that maybe you think you'll forget later, you're welcome to jot those down too on your Post-it note. So let's just take like 2 minutes, because you don't have to ask questions yourself. But feelings? Think about feelings, not thinking. Everyone's ready to wrap up. We were actually going to have people pair off, but I think we're a small enough group. Let's just go around, maybe, let's see, should we start? You know what, I'll start with, we'll go ahead and introduce Katie, so we know who's joining us to hear from, and then maybe we could just go around the room and introduce yourselves and how anything today that's inspired you or made you or challenged you that you've heard today. Oops. Sorry, Katie.
Oh, don't worry about it. Why doesn't everyone just say their name and where they're from and where you are in your work or law studies or whatever. Yeah,
that sounds good.
No, everyone can read.
Well, if there's anything I want to add, I will add after you've introduced yourself.
It's fine. Right. So I'm Katie Redford, and I'm one of the co-founders and co-directors of Earth Rights International, and we're an organization that focuses on the connection between human rights abuses and environmental degradation. And we have offices in various places around the world where this intersection, we believe, is particularly extreme. Burma, Thailand, where we focus on the Mekong region, the Amazon region. We have an office in Peru, and then here in Washington, D.C. And our sort of strategy is to bring the power of the legal system to bear on, and particularly the international legal system in home countries of the powerful elites like multinational corporations, global governments, banks, and to sort of challenge their power at the global level and in their home countries, while at the same time working with communities, activists, and villagers, people who are on the front line and experience human rights abuses, to build their power to resist human rights abuses and environmental degradation. So we have lawyers on our staff, we have trainers on our staff, we have journalists, we have grassroots human rights fact finders, working together all along sort of the global chain of injustice, fighting for global justice.
So we'll start with you, Hannah. Or I think it's Hannah.
It is.
I was hiding it. Come on in. Sorry, I'm late.
So you're just starting.
Hi everybody, I'm Hannah Flam. I'm a law student, and I've been doing some direct services work recently in family court with parents whose children are at risk of going into foster care or in foster care. and some housing work, mainly with evictions, and some tenant organizing. And I guess my overarching feeling from today is both real appreciation for the work that people have been doing for a long time and do today, but also feeling like there's this disconnect with what I see when you're interacting with clients who have sort of a more emergency situation, and it doesn't feel like you're doing, even if you're doing the best lawyering you can, there's very, very little recourse that you're offering, and you don't feel like you see change.
We're introducing ourselves. I know you just sat down, but just your name, where you're from, and then something that's inspired you about today or challenged you, or.
Sure. My name's Jen Robinson, and I'm Director of Legal Advocacy for the Bertha Foundation, which is funding CCR's Bertha Justice Institute and funds movement lawyering around the world. So for me, I think today is most inspiring because I do a lot of work sitting in an office in London on the admin side of the support that we provide around the world, and it's really nice to be here and actually meet people that are benefiting from that experience and seeing how inspired they are by the work of CCR and conferences like this, because that's why we do what we do.
My name is Karen Heredia, and I work for NMAP, the New Media Advocacy Project. I actually just started today. It's my first day. But in the past, I've worked in museums and worked with educational programs and doing a lot of community outreach. And so today I've been really impressed by kind of the scope and the possibilities now of this new position and broadening the work that I'm doing.
Introduce myself. So, my name's Terry Nalaska, and I'm happy to be here today and hear from everybody, and I'm just trying to facilitate our discussion.
So let's talk about
Of
what you're doing.
What do I?
And,
Okay.
and your
I went to CUNY Law in 2011, and was an Ella Baker Fellow in 2009. So happy to be here with CCR again. And the last few years I've been working with the United Auto Workers and the Global Organizing Institute, where we were trying to build global solidarity for workers trying to organize, auto workers trying to organize in the South of the United States. And
I'm Maria Levin. I'm an attorney in the International Human Rights Docket at CCR. I find it, it's always inspiring getting together with like-minded folks doing wonderful work, and the time for reflection then sort of leads to how can we be more effective in our work, how can we sort of organize ourselves better to really create change. So.
I'm Abby Downs. I'm a legal worker at CCR in the Guantanamo Project and International Human Rights Docket with Maria. Before working at CCR, I worked in the environmental department of a plaintiff-side firm, and before that, I worked at a social investment fund that invested in community-based, environmentally sustainable businesses. So I'm very excited to hear about your work and the intersection of human rights and environmental degradation. In terms of today, it's been kind of a really nice day to kind of do a lot of reflection, and it's been interesting how kind of a lot of the conversations have been framed around kind of what are the limits of the law, and so due to these, taking into account these limits, what's the best way to use it, and I think that's been interesting because obviously kind of the day-to-day is very focused on kind of how we can use the law and not kind of stepping back and thinking about kind of how it fits in and what its limits are. So it's just been a lot of kind of reflection, which has been nice.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Rivera. I will be a 3L here at CUNY in the fall. This summer, I am interning at Latino Justice, doing some impact litigation around civil rights for Latinos. In terms of reflection, I think that it's just kind of empowering to see what potential public interest careers could really be in the CUNY is a public interest focused school, but it's so easy to get caught up in the coursework and thinking about the traditional paths of lawyers and advocates, and so it's nice to be around people doing other types of lawyering.
Okay, so what I was thinking we could do is I had a couple questions in mind, but also we're small enough that I think we could, just have a discussion too. So I'll just open with one and then we'll see where it takes us. Exciting. So the thing that Katie, you didn't mention in your introduction of yourself was the case Doe versus Unical, and as I understand it, it began all with a paper in law school. Kind of. So if you could tell that story, that would be great.
Sure. I mean, I went to law school, like I think probably a lot of us, thinking about justice and fairness and saving the world, right? But for me, at least, not a whole lot of focus about what that meant, or, and probably not a whole lot of humility that, like, I might not save the whole world. And those were sort of euphemisms for what I wanted to do with my law career, but I didn't really know what that meant. And it was spending time before law school with communities that actually were living injustice and were experiencing injustice that really focused me. And that was on the Thai-Burma border in a refugee camp, where people that I lived with and people that I was working with were literally fleeing for their lives, and talking about, just unimaginable human rights abuses, from slave labor to rape to torture to being the targets of genocide and ethnic cleansing. And so with those kinds of real human beings who had told me their stories ringing in my ears when I went back to law school, I was very, very focused on becoming an international human rights lawyer and doing what I could while I was at law school to get the skills and experience and networks that I needed to do that kind of work. And so, I took all the classes I was supposed to. My summers I went and worked back in Thailand, back in Burma, with human rights NGOs. And during one of my summers, learned as part of my human rights work that it, in fact, wasn't just the Burmese military dictatorship that was committing these abuses or that was causing these human rights abuses, but that there were international corporations, American corporations even, and a villager said to me, like, there's nothing you can do as an American law student against our government. They just shoot everyone who challenges them and puts them in jail. But what about your oil companies? Your oil companies are causing our villages to be destroyed, causing our women to be raped because, and I was like, what do you mean? First of all, my oil company, like I'm just a law student. But, and it turned out that it was true that there were American and French and global corporations that had gone into contract with the Burmese military, and they had in fact hired them to provide security for their operations for this gas pipeline that they were building across Burma. And in fulfilling their terms of the contract, the Burmese army, on behalf of the U.S. and French oil companies, had forced thousands of people off their lands, conscripted tens of thousands of villagers to do slave labor, building military barracks, building helicopter landing pads for the companies, bridges and other infrastructure. And these villagers, one of them in particular, said, look, we've written to the U.S. government, we've written to the oil company boards, we've written to the executives, we've written to the World Bank saying, please stop funding this pipeline, it's killing our people, and everyone has ignored us. So would it be illegal, in your opinion, for us to blow up the pipeline if we've tried everything else? And I was like, okay, I'm only a second-year law student, so I'm not really sure. We didn't learn that one in law school, but this idea that you can write letters and blow things up, and that was the options, that those were the two options that the folks from Burma felt that they had to protect their lives and their families and their homelands. And so being a good law student, I thought, well, I'm sure you can sue, because that's what they teach you how to do in law school. And so I did, like you said, go back to school in my third year, to research how we could use legal strategies and who could we sue. Of course, this American oil company, Unical, would never be able to get away with this if they were doing it in the United States. Or they probably would, but it would be a lot harder. And so I thought, surely there's a legal strategy. And of course, as a student of human rights law, I was totally inspired by the work that CCR had done and by the Filartiga lawsuit. That was the first case that I actually read, where I went back and I read it again in law school, because I was like, oh my God, there is something that people can do as lawyers, and I thought, okay, the Filartiga case, it's kind of the same fact pattern in terms of, abuses happening in a foreign country and people from foreign countries suffering from human rights abuses, yet the perpetrator is here in the United States. And in that case, it was a police warden, and in this case, it was an American oil company. So I thought, well, why can't we do what CCR did? And I even talked to lawyers from CCR, and they were like, oh, it's not that simple. We've been looking for the right case to be able to do this, and it would be wonderful to be able to find a way to sue an American oil company. So I spent my third year writing a paper as an independent study and it was called using the Alien Tort Statute to hold corporations accountable for human rights abuses in Burma, Unical in Burma, a case study. And I presented it to my teacher, and he said, sat down with me, and he said, Katie, I've given you an A because you've done the very best you can do with a losing argument. This will never happen. It's unconstitutional. It's ridiculous. It's a terrible idea. And really wake up and smell the coffee. And I had this moment of feeling totally like the wind was knocked out of my sails. And here's my professor, and he's an expert, obviously, and knows what he's talking about. And I'm just like, what do you mean we can't do this? And then I kind of just sort of stopped for a minute, and I looked at him, and I was like, you're just saying we can't do this because nobody ever has. And I'm going to prove you wrong. And so a friend of mine from law school and a person from Burma who we had been working with and who we had become friends with, we decided to start Earth Rights International to bring this lawsuit, because we realized kind of quickly that you can't just, well, you probably can actually, but that it would be hard to bring a lawsuit just as like a law student who didn't have a job or any resources. So we got funding to start Earth Rights International. It was $30,000, and we were like, let's sue an oil company, and we did, and we did, and long story short, less than 2 years out of law school, and we teamed up with CCR and some other amazing lawyers who agreed with us that the law is a tool that is dynamic and can always be changed if you have the right facts and you have the right case and you have the right lawyers and you have the right energy. And they agreed with us that this was possible. And we never believed that it was impossible. We always thought, of course we're going to be able to do this, just because no one's ever done it before and all the experts say that you can't. Screw that, and we're going to do it. And we did. And the Unical case became the first case in U.S. legal history where a corporation was allowed to be sued in U.S. courts for human rights abuses overseas. And my professor for the time being was wrong, and that was this really wonderful, and all of a sudden we went in one day from being crazy idealists who were idiots and stupid and doing something that was unconstitutional to visionary geniuses, you know, who were the experts in international human rights and corporate accountability. And we were the same, you know, young idealistic students who yesterday were dumb and, you know, idealistic, and today we're experts. And then, you know, that was kind of this incredible thing that did start with a crazy idea, and this idea that I've heard all through today, which is, I don't really know. I see the problem. I know that this is injustice. I don't know what exactly I can do about it, but I have to do something. And yeah, so it was a paper, but it was so much more than that. I mean, it was putting together an amazing team and having working with communities on the ground in Burma and really brave human rights workers in Burma who risked their lives for the 12 years of the life of this case to document the abuses, to gather the evidence, to organize our plaintiffs and our witnesses, and to bring the stories of the abuses from the jungles into the courts of the United States. And yeah, so it was a paper, but it was an incredible team effort where we had just enough expertise to ground us in reality, but also just enough kind of crazy idealism to think it was possible and to not listen when the experts said that it wasn't. So, yeah.
Did you ever go back and visit your professor?
Oh my God, that's another long story.
Yeah.
Well,
you don't have to tell the whole
it turns out I did many. So when we got jurisdiction and the case went forward, and essentially my theory in my paper was like what the court said should happen, I think I kind of wrote him an email that was something like, you know, something that was like that. I did. Yeah. And he was like, I'm so proud of you, Katie, and I really believe in what you're trying to do, but I still believe you're wrong, and I don't think this is an appropriate use of the law. And this is a battle, but the war has not been won, and we'll see what happens when this ever makes it to the Supreme Court. So this is Jack Goldsmith. Okay, this was my professor who went on to make a career writing torture memos for the Bush administration, and representing oil companies and every single one of the defendants that we and anyone who was doing alien tort statute litigation was the expert witness on the other side. And, you know, a case went up to the Supreme Court in 2004, and he wrote the Bush administration's amicus brief saying that the alien tort statute is unconstitutional. Everything that he wrote in red in the sidelines of my paper, he put in a brief to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court sided with our side that time, and not his. But you know, he kept with it. You know, the bad guys also have tunnel vision, and he kept with it, and as did the powers that be. And when the first corporate case went to the Supreme Court last year in a case called Kiobel v. Shell, he wrote the amicus brief for Chevron and all of the oil companies and mining companies that were arguing against this kind of litigation. And this time they found a court that was pretty friendly to corporations and hostile to international law and human rights. And the court sided. In fact, you can't even imagine, in the first day of the oral arguments, Paul Hoffman, the lawyer for the plaintiffs on our side, was 15 seconds into his opening statements, and Justice Kennedy said, counsel, what do you say about the Goldsmith brief on page 17 where he says, and I was like, oh my God, Jack frickin' Goldsmith is still here. Everything that he, you know, it was like I'm never going to escape this guy. Yeah, so.
And
so
it's not
yes.
over.
It's not over. No, I mean, so now I'm sort of the one that's like, it's not over, and you're still wrong, and we're still right. And he still says, which is a lie, but he still says that he believes in what we're all trying to do, but not using the courts to do it. whatever. So yes.
Wow.
But I never, it's funny, I did, here's actually a life lesson that I had from this story that I think is really important because, look, now I've been doing this for 20 years and it's been this not gonna, we started with nothing, we made it to the pinnacle and we had a setback. And we will. I mean, this is when you're talking about global systemic change or national systemic change, we're talking about movement lawyering. So whatever it is we're working on, it's going to be a lifetime. And you're going to win some and you're going to lose some. And you're never going to stop doing it whether you're winning or losing, right? You win, you're going to try for the next step. You lose, you're going to try to, gain back some of the ground that you lost, but grounding that system change in clients and real living, breathing human beings is so absolutely important because that's what, for me, has kept me going. It's like I could give up working on the issue of global corporate accountability, like blah, 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 global corporate accountability, as an issue, it's like, what does that mean? But when I think about my clients who had their babies killed because they tried to escape from slave labor on an oil company pipeline, or who had their husbands hanged because they were standing up to defend the environment in Nigeria, or whose family members were disappeared in Colombia because Chiquita hired paramilitary death squads to provide security for their plantations. Those are real people who you can't forget. And I had lunch with Jack Goldsmith before the Sosa case in 2004, before it went up to the Supreme Court. And I said to him, I was like, how can you make these arguments? And he was like, well, I don't believe that this is constitutional. I was like, all right, forget about what's constitutional or not. Let me tell you about my client. And I knew at this moment that he had just had a new baby, so this is a little bit sleazy of me, but I don't care. And I was like, let me tell you about my client, Jane Doe 1, who didn't have a name because to protect her identity, whose 3-month-old baby was kicked into a fire during a forced relocation to make way for this pipeline, and who was beaten, and she herself was kicked into the fire because her husband had escaped from slave labor on Unical's pipeline. How am I supposed to go and tell her that this is unconstitutional when her baby's dead and this is her only chance at justice? And his face went pale. And he said to me, he's like, Katie, wait, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Did that really happen? And I was like, wait, are you telling me you don't even know the facts of this case?
Yeah.
And he had no idea. He did not know the facts of this case. He didn't know the facts of the case. He didn't know what the case was about. It was all about the Constitution and separation of powers and federalism, and he had no idea. And at the end of that lunch, he said to me, he was like, he's like, between you and me, don't quote me on this. And of course, I have blabbed it to everyone since that moment. But he was like, I actually think I was wrong, and I think I'm wrong about this. He said, maybe the only time that this is constitutional is when you sue a corporation. He was like, I think Chevron should be punished, and you're right. And I was, and so two things. One, then 5 years later, he's representing Chevron and making bazillions of dollars, being their expert witness. But in that moment, I was like, stories matter. Real human beings, even this right-wing nut job was affected and changed his mind for a moment about the law because he heard a story about a client. And I think that's really important. I don't know where I was going with that or what you even asked me or if that answered that question, but yeah, real talk.
Real talk.
Yeah.
Saying that's interesting because it makes me feel like people like him hide behind the legalities of the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
They hide behind, so he never read the facts, or maybe he did, and now he was like,
Yeah.
He erased them from his head, right? But it's like this.
He probably didn't. I mean, I don't remember reading facts in law school cases. I mean, when you're reading Supreme Court decisions, it's very, like, the majority of it is legal stuff from what I remember. I mean, I remember that, like, the Filartiga case is one of the only cases I remember, and it's because there were facts in it.
And when the
outcomes
decision. And the decisions are mostly bad, they ignore the facts. You know,
Right.
They're not going to
Yeah.
say that the baby was thrown into a fire. They're going
Right.
to say
Right, because that
Right.
was
Chevron. You know.
then you couldn't take that moral position. It would be impossible.
Yeah.
If you said the facts, so you just have to hide the facts or
Right.
ignore the facts.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
yeah.
So I don't know, I think that's really important, and I think that's one of the things I love about being a lawyer is that we serve clients. It's client driven, right? We might be working, we're movement lawyers, we're forwarding issues, we're trying to create system change, but as a lawyer, our way of doing that is by serving real, living, breathing human beings that can, first of all, remind us every day when we're getting tired and frustrated and overwhelmed that actually it matters. You know, it's not just an issue. And that's what makes us different from the other side and keeps me going, at least, most of the time.
Since we're on the
Yeah.
Unical case, one of my questions you and I talked about before was, could you talk a little bit about the decision to settle and just the contradictions involved?
Sure. Yeah, we were sort of talking about that in the context of the tensions that sometimes come up when you're representing clients, but in a case that's part of a larger movement or that's like emblematic of a larger movement. And for sure, the Unical case, because it was the first case of its kind where a corporation was being sued for global corporate human rights abuses, and this was the case ran from 1996 until 2004, which was kind of the height of the anti-globalization movement, the height of the Free Burma movement, and this case was really a rallying cry for both of those movements. Unical in Burma became the poster child for the anti-globalization movement, and people talked about it in the Battle for Seattle, at the World Economic Forum, sort of like, this is what happens when corporations run amok in the world with no regulation and no accountability. And meanwhile, the Free Burma movement was using the Unical case as their sort of rallying cry around the world for getting governments to pass sanctions. We have to pass sanctions on Burma. Burma's the South Africa of the 90s, because look what happens when companies go into Burma. Unical was the story, and so we really benefited from that as lawyers. It was every time something happened in our case, it was automatic front page media, lots of media because of it. We were, Nightline, so much media, because there was this huge audience and there was this huge movement that was reinforcing what we were doing in court. And so a lot of widespread communities felt ownership on this case. And then there were our 11 clients who were living in hiding for the 10 years of the case. They couldn't be in their villages because we as lawyers needed to be able to communicate with them. We needed to be able to get them to depositions if they needed to. And so just even being seen with a white person was dangerous for them. They were all living in hiding in jungles of Burma. They couldn't get into refugee camps because, again, the refugee camps had very tight security, and so we wouldn't be able to get them out for their depositions, to have interrogatories, whatever we needed in the case. So they were living literally day to day, risking arrest in Thailand, risking being retaliated against in Burma. And when the case went to trial, and we were actually ordered by the judge to go into settlement negotiations before trial. Like, the judge, that often happens actually, where the judge is like, why don't you see if you can work this out? And we had conversations with our clients, and they said, said, well, what does it mean to get a settlement? You know, what can we get in a settlement that we can't get in trial? What can we get in trial that we couldn't get in a settlement? And when we did, you know, explain all of that, and we told them the reality of, like, okay, here's what happens in a trial. You get a jury. If you win, you will get a jury verdict and you'll get damages. But we don't know if we're going to win. You could lose. And if you win, then they will appeal. And those damages you may not see them for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And 2, 3, 4, 5 years for people who are living in hiding and whose children can't go to school and who can't get medical treatment if they get sick because going to a hospital is dangerous for them. That's real. That's life or death things. And there are all kinds of complications with the trial too, you know, that I can talk about later. But anyway, our clients, they had certain demands, and there were things they could get in the settlement that they wouldn't be able to get at trial. And so they did. They decided to settle. And it was really hard as a lawyer who I was sort of like the Free Burma activist. I was like, oh my God, we can't settle. No, that's like being bought out. But I can say that and go home to my, you know, safe home where I'm not going to be arrested, and I can go to the doctor. And so they did decide to settle, and we had a lot of backlash from the anti-globalization movement. Like, how could you settle? This is our case. How come you didn't talk to us about this? Like, this is just being bought off by a company, just like they buy everyone else off, and they bought you guys off. And it's like, well, wait, first of all, do you realize this isn't your case? You know, my friends at NGOs, this isn't your case. This is our client's case, and this is their decision. And it wasn't the decision that I wanted, but it was the best thing for them, and it was their decision. But there was this real backlash from the movements that this case was part of when our clients decided to settle, and that was really, really hard, and something we weren't prepared for, or I wasn't prepared for, and it was important, and it was an important lesson, and we were very fortunate that in spite of the spokespeople for the movements that this case was part of being really angry at us, their public statements and comments were, this is a great victory for human rights, and this is a big step forward. And we didn't know what they were going to say when the media came and interviewed them. We didn't prepare for that. We weren't ready, because we thought that the movements were, but of course they didn't. Our job as lawyers was to serve the interests of our clients. They have much different goals that aren't always the same. So that was kind of a learning about how the importance of the interplay and making sure that you have communication. And, you know, I mean, often when you're in settlement negotiations, you can't go to Rainforest Action Network or Amnesty International or Global Exchange or whoever and say, by the way, we're going to be settling this case. You need to get on board with this. But having that kind of interaction was, and at the end of the day, they had our back because there was this trust that we knew what we were doing. But that was hard.
And it also serves the movement.
Yeah.
Serves the movement to show success. Right?
For sure. Yeah, but sometimes activists aren't
Yeah,
necessarily. I mean, sometimes it can be about the individual rather than, you know. So yeah, it was an interesting phenomenon, and something that I think we as lawyers have to really grapple with a lot. And again, not something that you learn in law school. You know. Yeah. Although 16 law students at UVA Law School this past spring did from me. So at least there's 16 of them that have thought about it. Yeah.
Yeah, those are, I mean, I was an intern at CCR when CCR settled the case. You guys, yeah.
Yep.
So I was there the day when people were like, "Woo!" and running around, and everyone was really happy. But in that too, you could hear, there was immediately afterwards, I remember just the buzz of kind of people being like, is it good, is it bad, is it enough?
Yeah.
It's a drop in the bucket. I mean, it was millions, but what the oil companies have is like, of course, billions.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think overall, I think everybody it was a celebration, especially after Kiel.
I know. Oh my
It's like,
God! Thank God.
Thank God.
Well,
we settled.
yeah. I mean,
But-
that was a really. That is one of those cases where I absolutely believe that Shell settled because the movement pushed so hard. We have fights in Earth Rights a lot because we have campaigners, we have teachers, we have activists, and we have lawyers. And actually, the lawyers are the minority in our organization. We have like 60 people around the world, and probably about 15 or 20 of them are lawyers. Even though the legal work is the most high-profile work that we do, and the stuff that gets in the media, but there's always a fight over, did the lawyers win the Unical case, or did the campaigners win it, right? And it was the same thing with WIWA, and we're talking about the WIWA is the Agoni. We represented members from the Agoni 9 as well as other Agoni villagers who had experienced human rights abuses connected to their environmental organizing and activism against Shell in Nigeria, and some of our clients were actually hanged by the Nigerian military because of their nonviolent resistance to Shell's destruction of Agoni land for years, and so Shell spent all those years defending themselves and fighting tooth and nail to keep this case out of court, and they said very, very clearly all along, we will not give one dime to those Nigerian people. They're just trying to get something out of the deep pocket, and we will never pay them a dime. And and then sure enough, they paid them a lot of dimes. But I really, and we learned from the Unical case that the movement and the media and the sort of specter of a public trial was something that the oil companies just didn't want to have to deal with. And so we worked in advance of the trial with a lot of activists who formulated this Shell Guilty campaign that had everything from petitions to media, to art, to street theater, to anything to make Shell look bad publicly. And as it got closer and closer to trial, this campaign, this Shell Guilty campaign, ramped up. And to me, I feel like Shell was probably more scared of the publicity, or at least as scared of it, that the activists on the streets, and in Nigeria, there was all kinds of stuff happening in Nigeria than they were of the trial, because the only time that we've ever gone to trial in one of these cases, we lost. And that was against Chevron in San Francisco. It just, juries aren't necessarily ready to hear about the kinds of cases that we're all working on, and it is hard to believe actually when you hear the stories of what's happening.
It's funny because I guess from my perspective, being sort of more steeped in litigation, it was yes, the activism, but also the fact that Sir so and so from Shell was going to have to come to New York and testify about what happened, and it was going to reopen all kinds of wounds, and it was that publicity that was certainly worth $15.5 million to avoid.
Right.
It was
totally
much more damage to their reputation was at stake from the trial, win or lose. Than the money, less money I'm sure than they had spent on their attorney's fees, less money than they had spent on their PR campaign to say how much good they did,
like
in
a
Agoni,
fraction.
less money it was still sort of the humiliation factor and the reputation factor, but both work together, I think.
Absolutely. And I felt like with that case, we didn't get the backlash from the movement that we did from the Unical case initially, just because we were prepared for it, and we talked to them, and I think also by that time we had lost the Chevron case, and people were like, what? How could a jury look at the evidence and say that Chevron wasn't liable? And so I think people realized, and you know, the communication between the movement and the folks in the activist community, really, with the lawyers and the clients, it was we learned. Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
remember when people were concerned about it.
Totally.
That's why we did have the,
Yep.
you know.
And it's hard too because as lawyers, you know, you need to be integrated with the movement, you need to be communicating, but you also there needs to be a little bit of a firewall, because one of the key sort of arguments that the defense will make in these cases is, oh, these aren't really real lawyers and this isn't a real legal case, they're just using, Your Honor, they're using your courtroom as a place to litigate their political agenda. You know, this is just a show, you know, and so we have to make sure that we don't give them a reason to be able to make that argument, that this isn't about the law, this is about getting publicity for their cause, this is about their political agenda. These are globalization anarchists who are, you know, wearing black and throwing bricks through windows in Seattle, and now they're just wearing a suit, but it's the same people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Don't you think?
Yeah,
that
and
was,
Shell took it even further by raising ethics
Yeah.
violations by saying
Yeah.
that we were interfering with, you know, by doing publicity, interfering with
Right.
trial possibly, and
Yeah.
you know, by
Yeah.
doing any media basically around the issue, which was
Yeah.
They took an ethical.
They didn't make an ethical. They raised the ethical concerns with the judge, sort of, you know, out. We were surprised by it. It came out. It was at a hearing, and the judge, you know, was pissed at us. So we ended up having to do, you know, a lot of briefing around our First Amendment rights to talk about these issues. But we also, frankly, made a decision not to push it. I mean, we had
Yeah.
to litigate the case. We were going to trial.
Yeah.
You know, we were
Yeah.
like, okay, this is maybe the fight that we don't need to be having right now.
Yeah.
You know.
And it's a tension. It's hard, because again, like when you've got the activists who are like, the case isn't about you lawyers aren't going to win the case. It's about winning in the court of public opinion, and it's like,
Right.
well, yes, and we need to win the case too.
And remember,
So-
they opposed Paul's, maybe who else is Paul's pro hoc vice application, just a standard form to be able to argue in court. They opposed it, saying that he, you know, had stuff on his website and whatever, you know,
Yeah,
just ridiculous.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. Well, and in that case, you know, and we were joking around. We're like, well, clearly the judge must know that we have nothing to do with these activists, because we would know that it's not Shell guilty, it's Shell liable. Right? Clearly, if the lawyers had anything to do with it, they wouldn't call it the Shell guilty campaign. But we did in our case against Chevron when we went to trial in San Francisco, and we had this, I mean, like, we had hired this whole PR firm, we had a whole organizing and campaigning strategy and a whole media strategy, and on the first day, the judge issued a gag order to
Wow.
all parties, not only lawyers, but the clients and anyone connected to the lawyers in the case. We got a gag order that was like, no one is allowed to talk to the media.
Did you challenge that?
Wow.
We did, and we challenged it on the First Amendment thing, and she was like, absolutely not. And then we made the decision. We were like, okay, we can either go up on appeal against the judge that's presiding over our trial, and if we win, she's going to hate us. She's going to be pissed.
Wow.
And it's going to delay the trial, and our Nigerian clients are all here in San Francisco, and they're like living in people's homes and staying, you know, and so we basically made a strategic decision. We were like, this is totally unconstitutional, and this is violating our First Amendment rights, and we have to just suck it up, because this is not win-win, it's lose-lose. Like, if we win, we lose with our judge. We're back, you know, so
It's a hard one.
it's a hard one, but we learned
Yeah.
for the Shell trial, and we sort of like had everything. We basically prepared for getting a gag order, you know, for the possibility, and had all of these activist organizations that understood and knew what the talking points were, and knew what the legal issues were, so that if we did get gagged during the trial, that other people would be able to talk to the media, and also talk to the media in a way that we would feel good about. Yeah, but it didn't happen because they were so scared that they settled instead.
Well-
See, like big oil companies are scared of people like Maria and I.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. We have 10. That went by fast, didn't it?
Oh my gosh,
We have
yeah.
10. So, if people have questions, we can open it up. I was going to ask some questions more about just sustaining yourself going forward. How do you, kind of those how do you as a movement lawyer continue doing the work when, there are some major setbacks and,
Yeah.
your clients are, people are suffering a lot in the rest of the world, and here we are in a lovely conference. Like, how do you jive those two together? So that would be, so that's my one question. But we could take a couple from the floor and then just.
I was curious how kind of, if you could maybe provide an example or two about how having kind of a multidisciplined staff informs how you litigate or informs your programmatic work. So having trainers, lawyers, and journalists and investigators kind of practically kind of how does that shape your model? And if you have any practical or concrete examples, I'm really interested to hear about that.
Any others? And I'll just. Any questions?
I have a question. I guess if you could talk a little bit about the process of starting your own nonprofit and that decision to embark on that pathway instead of maybe joining another organization that could have done or that would have been open to such litigation.
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's good, right? Those are three.
Yeah.
We could start with those and then end with the sustaining, because that's a good
Yeah,
one.
yeah. And I would love to hear what other folks like Jen and Maria say to that too, because I'm always looking for advice on that one.
We can all help
I don't
each
have
other.
the answers. Yeah. When I was in law school, there really weren't any organizations that, well, first of all, I think that we all, when we're in law school and graduating, face the challenge if you're going into a public interest world that it's really hard for public interest and small budget strapped organizations to hire someone fresh out of law school. That's just a reality that we all face, right? I'm now run an organization that when we have funding to hire a lawyer, I don't have this huge staff that can train them, so it's hard for us to hire someone right out of law school, which is why we love Bertha so much, because the Bertha Foundation has really filled that gap and created these fellowships that allows us to provide fellowships and to train people, and we have no choice but to hire people who are young and new, and that's coming from me, who's committed to young lawyers, because the young people are the crazy ones with the crazy ideas that are impossible, right? And the experts like me are like, you can't do that, I'm not like that. I'll never say that to anyone. But still, I am in a space now where I sort of do have to think about things like budgets and staff and, sustainability. So anyway, that was a reality, and I'm sure you're struggling with that too. That I didn't feel like anyone would hire me right out of law school, because you have that catch-22 of I don't have experience, but then where do you get the experience? And also the work that I really wanted to do at the nexus of human rights and environment was just, no one was doing that at that time. There were environmental organizations and there were human rights organizations. And 1995, which is the year I graduated from law school, and that was the year that the Agoni 9 were executed. Ken Saro-Wiwa, became my client, was executed. That was a real watershed moment, I think, for the human rights and environmental communities coming together, because it was environmentalists having their civil and political rights violated. And for the first time, the Agoni were prisoners of conscience for Amnesty International, and also the focus of grassroots organizing for Greenpeace and Sierra Club. So that was this just amazing moment, but it didn't exist when I was graduating, and so truly, that it felt like, okay, if I want to do what I want to do and what I eventually ended up doing, I needed to start my own nonprofit. And again, it was just kind of like, well, why wouldn't I start my own nonprofit? And there was funding to do it. And again, the Echoing Green Foundation, the Echoing Green Fellowship is still a really wonderful opportunity for people to do that. Yeah, so I didn't feel like I had a choice. But I do think, I mean, it's a much faster world now. There are many more opportunities for people like you, and there are a lot more jobs and organizations to do this work. So I wouldn't necessarily say that that's the route. If you can do it in an existing organization, it's probably better to, because I did spend a lot of my time like figuring out how do we become a IRS 501c3 tax exempt organization, and like how do I have personnel policies, and so yeah, but I think that a lot of us, it's like you don't see the path there for you, you're going to blaze it, you're going to trailblaze, and that's something that we all have done, I'm sure, in this world. And then on the sustainability.
Well, but there was one more question. I'm sorry. Gosh,
Oh,
just the
you
end
were
of the
asking about
day.
how it all fits
Yes.
together.
Yeah, kind of
Yeah.
having an
Integrated
integrated model and if there's
Yeah.
examples
Journalists.
of how that informs.
Right.
like-
So really our whole organization and our theory of change, we didn't set out to build a global organization with 60 staff. I mean, I certainly never imagined myself running an organization that's as big as it is today. We set out with 3 of us to sue an oil company, and that became this catapult that really became the sort of central organizing principle of all our work, where we had lawyers in the global or US legal arena, but then we had people at the grassroots in the communities from the countries that were being harmed. And all along the way in that case, we couldn't have won that case. We did have the best lawyers in the world working on that case, but if we didn't have skilled people from Burma who understood US evidence law, who understood how to document it, how to work with communities and organize communities, we could have been the best lawyers in the world and we would have had no case, right? And at the same time, the folks on the ground in Burma could have gotten the best evidence in the world, but if they didn't have the lawyers who knew how to take that evidence and turn it into a case, and so really everything we do comes from that model that, at least in the system change that we're working on, which is the human rights and environmental abuses that are inherent in the global economic system, that globalization is what it is. It's at the global level, it's at the national level, it's at the regional level, and it's at the local level. The decisions and laws and policies made at the global level have impacts in the most real, profound way at the local level, and we feel like we can't address the problem only at one place. So that's why we've got lawyers, here in the US, international lawyers, but also regional lawyers litigating in Thailand and in Peru, in Burma now, which is unbelievable, in Cambodia, working with communities whose cases that it is, but those communities need to be strong, they need to be powerful, they need to understand what it is that they're being asked to do, and so that's why we have our Earth Rights schools, to build their power from the grassroots while challenging the power at the global level, and it all fits together in that way for us. Yeah. Time to wrap up.
Yeah, one more.
Okay.
We're actually on time.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
I know sustainability is a big question, right?
Well, I'll just say what I said in
Yeah.
South Africa, which people seem to think was interesting. When I started this out, and I really treated the work as a sprint. And you can when you're young and 25 and have a lot of energy, and like it was just for the first few years I don't think I took a day off. I think like in the first year I think I took Christmas off, and that was it, and I didn't even notice it. I was so tunnel vision, and so like, well, of course I can't sleep, I can't take a day off, because it's not like the refugees are taking a day off, right? It's not like they have the luxury. It's our clients are in hiding every single day. They can't take a vacation, so how can I? And then you start to realize as you do it for a long time, that like that extra day or that extra week when you're doing system changing work, this is a lifetime, right? Our goal is to make change over the course of a lifetime. We can't be arrogant to think if I just work one more weekend, I'm gonna change everything. That's ridiculous, you know, like that's so cocky to think that you're that important, right? And so then I remember thinking, okay, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And you have to do this work and be able to do it in mile 1, 2, and 3, but also mile 26. And that means thinking of it as a long-term struggle and taking care of yourself, and being able to sustain it over the long term, because the issues that we're dealing with are going to take our lifetimes to really address them. And then what I've recently realized as I've gotten older is that it's not even a marathon, it's a relay race. You know, that my role is to, yes, do this for my lifetime, but also be able to pass the baton to the next person, because we're not going to solve these problems in my lifetime. We're going to have to pass it on to the next person, which is again why I think, like, you know, you guys and conferences like this and the Bertha Fellowship is so important. You know, that for me, I need to also be able to help other people do this work, so that when I'm tired or when I'm taking a vacation or when I'm you know, resting and sustaining, someone else is doing it, right? And we are not that important. And I'll just close as an environmentalist. You know, I do talk about sustainability all the time, right? And we talk about the importance of taking care of the earth and sustaining this planet that we all need to survive. And yet, as activists, we treat our bodies and ourselves as slash and burn agriculture, you know? And we say to the corporations and the governments, you have to take care of this land. And if we don't take care of our own planet, and we don't treat ourselves in a sustainable way, then we're just hypocrites. And we owe it to the communities that we work with and our clients to be able to do it for the long haul. Because just as I believe our planet is rebelling against what we've done to it now, your body will do the same thing. And I've seen too many people break down because they think they're that important that they have to work one more day or one more weekend, and they're not realizing that this is a lifetime that we need to sustain. And it's a lot easier to say than do, but it's, I think, why we need to really remember to acknowledge that and to help each other do it.
That was a great closing. Well, thank you so much for coming and speaking and sharing. And unless people have any other questions, I think to close out, I don't know, maybe we could just go around and say, you know, one word or two if you have, about either the whole day or the session, whatever you feel comfortable with. And if you're making that commitment to sustaining yourself, think about that, and maybe you could write it down on a Post-it note, take it with you to work, and put it up on in your cubicle or wherever you work. But how about if we start this way? Is that okay?
Trailblazing? In terms of the whole conference?
I guess toward the end, the word that resonates with me is healing.
Inspiring.
Yes. Courageous.